Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our next installment of the business webinar series. My name is Trace Blackmore, and hopefully you know me from the Scaling Up H2O podcast. If you don't, what are you thinking? Go out there and find the Scaling Up H2O podcast. So we're going to be doing the webinar series today. It's the last one of the year. And I want to tell you about a couple of things that we are planning in the meantime, but also brought to you by the Association of Water Technologies. I think most people on the call today are members of the AWT. If you are not, this is the organization that really supports us. Make sure that we have all the information that we need to continue doing what we do and making ourselves better as we're making the industry better. So more information about that at awt.org. And I mentioned the Scaling Up H2O podcast. That can be found anywhere podcasts are found. This is a podcast that is perfect for our industry because we have so much windshield time. We are driving around from account to account. And unless we're listening to the radio, we really don't have anything else that we can do. Maybe we can make some phone calls. Well, there are well over 200 episodes out there on Scaling Up H2O, and you can listen to these. These will help hone some skills that you are looking for, and maybe even give you a couple of challenges so you can get out of the day-to-day rut and try some new things. So again, anywhere podcasts are found, look for Scaling Up H2O. Also, the way I know Michael Warady is he is a Rising Tide Mastermind member. And the Rising Tide Mastermind is a group that we put together. So if you like things like this, imagine that you're in a community where we're always doing things like this. We're always learning from each other. So when you have an issue, you don't have to start at step one. You can learn from others' experiences, and you could get started at step 3 or 4 or 5 using other people's experiences. So if you are interested in learning more about that, I urge you to go to scalinguph2o.com/mastermind, and I'd love to have a conversation with you about that. Some other events that are coming up just around the corner on November 18th. Jill Cavano, also a Rising Tide Mastermind member, is going to be talking about SWOT analysis. So analysis, how do you say that? Anyway, that's what she's talking about. That is going to be one of the AWT webinars. So if you want to register to that, go to awt.org, go over to the events section. Is it events, Heidi, where it is? And scroll down and you can see the webinars there and you can register for that. And we are planning to do more of these webinars throughout next year. We're still in the planning phase. We're a little bit behind. I was hoping to at least be able to tell you what the next one is going to be. Unfortunately, I don't have that for you. So stay tuned to both AWT and the Scaling Up H2O podcast, and we will be sure to tell you what the next installments are. Quick update, huge success, the business owners meeting that took place the day before the Providence, Rhode Island AWT convention. Huge success. And the AWT has decided to do that once again. That's going to be before the Vancouver convention. So if you are a business owner and you did not attend this last year, you definitely want to attend it this next time. And for those of you that attended, you know you can't afford not to attend these business owners meeting. Just spectacular. So again, more information on that by going to awt.org. Now, all of that out of the way, I want to introduce our speaker. And Mike, I was trying to think how you and I met. I think you reached out to me. Does that sound right?
It does. Yeah, I think I listened to the podcast and reached out just to connect.
And I'm so glad you did. You and I have traded so much information, and you are just superior at what you do, how you do it, the processes in which you do all of that. And I'm just going to stop talking because I want you to share all that with us. So I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to you. So please welcome Michael Warady.
All right. Can you all see my screen? Excellent. Trace, Heidi, thank you for letting me come on and talk to some folks, and everyone for joining. So today we're going to talk a little bit about transitioning or exiting from your water treatment business, and that's going to take the form of several different items. Everything from who are the people that are on the other side of the table, so you understand what their motivations are, what their interests are, what you should be thinking about in terms of your current day-to-day business, as well as kind of what next steps might look like for you. And I know everyone always says this, but I'll say it just because I don't mind being interrupted, and I'd much rather have a conversation than talk at everybody for the next hour. So please feel free to raise your hand, and I'm happy to pause if anything comes up. So so I mean, just repeating what I just said in terms of what we're going to go through today. Characteristics that investors like to look at in businesses like water treatment businesses. How should you think about valuing your business? I think really importantly is how can you support your team and your customers by choosing the right person or people to come in after you? I think something that's on the top of a lot of minds is, can I sell to my employees or family or friends? And if so, how can I fund my retirement? And then what are the next steps? And so just a brief introduction to me. I'm the CEO of EAI Water. EAI is a 35-year-old water treatment business based out of Corona, California, near Los Angeles. You all might have heard about me, or I might have reached out to you in the past from Silmar Group. And the reason why is I helped an owner of EAI Water transition out of his business over the last year or so at EAI. You'll see this picture of me. This is pre-pandemic, Michael. So a lot has changed over the last couple of years. Big Kansas City Chiefs, big Duke Blue Devils fan. Actually, I was thinking about it, Trace. I think my podcast, what may have been the last podcast of last year. So it's been almost a full year, which seems absolutely crazy, but kind of part one of this discussion. And I've spent a lot about the last decade in the water industry across a range of supply chain, project development, sales and service roles. And I used to not lead with the supply chain stuff, but just what's going on with the industry right now felt like it's become more and more relevant and helpful for all of us that are dealing with kind of the chemical supply chains, equipment supply chains right now. And so I thought it would be helpful just to kind of base ourselves in terms of, why are we having this discussion? And I think the first reason is the water industry and the people in it are getting older. There was a lot of baby boomers that have been in this industry for a long time, and a lot of them are looking to retire over the next several years. There are huge questions throughout the industry about how to manage, what people call the workforce transition, but what really is, how do you transfer institutional knowledge from the current generation to the younger generation? And so this is taking place at the smallest AWT firm level. It's taking place very prominently in the municipal side of the water industry, from water and wastewater operators that are retiring, and there aren't the younger guys coming in with the appropriate levels of certifications, almost like a CWT or a Legionella cert. And it's called the silver tsunami. And so that's kind of at the macro level. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But on the micro level, I think the question then that emerges is, how do I as a business owner think about that? What does that mean for me? And I know it's a serious topic. It's a topic that a lot of people are thinking about. But as we think about the water industry, it's been around forever, and it's going to be around forever, right? We're kind of a real important leg of this stool of civilization. And so I in my office the other day, I found this old Bet's Handbook of Industrial Water Conditioning, and I put it next to my 7-week-old daughter, and I thought it was like a 30-year-old book with a 7-week-old. I thought it was pretty funny. So really, I just wanted to show off my daughter. And so in the industrial water treatment market, again, there are a lot of us out there, right? This is a little bit of research that we did in terms of what's the market share of some of the big boys, the Nalcos, the Chemtreats of the world. And what you see on the right side is that there are a ton of firms out there that are all in similar situations as you are today. On the right side, you might recognize this. This is from the AWT benchmarking study. And essentially what it's showing is that there are a lot of really small companies out there, and a lot of them are very long lived, right? It's almost 60% have been around for more than 20 years. and another 20% have been around for 10 years. And so as we think about these owner entrepreneurs, owner operators in this space, a lot of them are starting to think about next steps. And that's something that I guess I've been trying to promote within the industry, within my Rising Tides group as well. Like how do we think about helping these individuals retire, but also how do we think about transitioning that knowledge, those customer relationships, those vendor relationships with the next generation in order to kind of ensure the continued success of the industry. And so as I said at the beginning, I think step one in this process for any owner that's looking to sell or transition out of their business is to think really long and hard about who is on the other side of the table. Who am I having these conversations with? And so actually about my Rising Tides group, when I first joined, I got to ask a question of the group, right? This is something that I think everyone's been able to do. When you first join, you get to ask everyone else a question. And my question, as someone that was not raised in the water industry, was, how many of you all business owners are multi-generation? Or how many of you are entering in without, a parent that was in the industry? And the answer is every single person in my group was second or third generation, which is remarkable, right? And I think that's in many respects ideal. And so the first thing I always tell folks that are looking to potentially transition or sell their business is if employees or it's a friends and family that you think would be a good person to step into your shoes and take on a managerial or ownership role, that should be something you really consider. And then the question becomes then, how do you fund your retirement? And we'll talk, I've put in quotes here, seller financing. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the future. The next group, which is a bigger bucket, but it's called private equity. Private equity, I think when people typically say that word or that phrase, they say it with a little bit of a sneer, right? It's not something people tend to like. And so as I was developing this presentation, I went through and I just Googled, like, what is the definition of private equity? Just to see if it would kind of demystify it a bit. And the answer is it's just investment or ownership into something that's not publicly traded, right? It's not on the stock exchange. And so what that means for the people that might reach out to you or you might have conversations with are somebody, whether it's a wealthy family, a wealthy individual, a company, gives money to another group of people that are a private equity fund. And this private equity fund then goes, buys companies and tries to grow them and sell them in the future. And there's nothing inherently wrong about buying and growing companies. I think where it is relevant to this conversation to you all is thinking through questions of, what value are they bringing to my company outside of just money? And what is the timeline of their investment? So the one thing that is potentially troublesome about private equity investment is that there's usually a fixed timeline, whether it's 5 years or 7 years or 10 years. And when you make decisions that are based on a 5-year time frame, they can be very different than for an owner entrepreneur who started in the 80s and wanted this to be his life's work. Those are very different mindsets. And then third group, strategics. I don't need to introduce these to you all. They've acquired a bunch of small AWT businesses over the last number of years. And then kind of this other catch-all category that I put in here of other folks that have shown a lot of interest over the last few years in the water industry. And these are family offices, which are kind of groups of high net worth individuals, or another thing called search funds, which has popped up recently. And I'm sure a lot of you have gotten emails from them, but these are like recently graduated MBA business school folks that are going around looking to get involved in an industry. And a lot of times don't care which. And so again, not to say you shouldn't have those conversations, but just try and understand what is the motivation behind that outreach. And so once you then have an idea of who is interested in my company, the next question that you need to understand or ask is, why are they interested in my company? Why are folks interested in the water industry? And I like to bucket it in two ways. One is they're interested in it for kind of macro perspective, macroeconomic, macro global perspectives. One is that throughout the country, water quality and quantity is decreasing, right? In the Southwest where I live, we're in another drought. our water quality is getting worse and worse from the Colorado River. In the Midwest, the Ogallala Aquifer is draining unsustainably. In the Southeast, there's a bunch of concerns about contaminants in water supplies. And so as folks see that, and they see that there needs to be a solution to some of those water issues, they view water as this interesting long-term investment opportunity. There's also a huge demand for sustainability, right? And at EAI, we're getting reached out to by a lot of our clients. A lot of them might have chief sustainability officers or chief operating officers, and they're looking for ways to reduce water consumption and reduce chemical usage. And I think that's something that the entire industry is experiencing, kind of regardless of location. And so again, investors think about that and say, okay, we need to figure out teams that can help us manage those incoming or growing sustainability requirements. Changing climate, hand in hand with water quality. Although I'll say, I personally did a project in the city of Houston after Hurricane Harvey. And it was an emergency purchase order through FEMA to build basically a temporary wastewater treatment facility because a lot of those systems had gone down. A couple of facilities actually were underwater. And what's interesting is not the right word, but what's concerning about that is the city of Houston and Texas in general has gone through the worst drought in recorded history, 2 of the worst hurricanes in recorded history, and then one of the biggest freezes in recorded history in the last 5 years. And that last freeze this past winter obviously ended up with a lot of people not having water supplies or being able to flush the toilet. And so again, water kind of undergirds everything, including economic growth. So whenever I talk to friends and like, what do you do? I say the water industry. What do you do? I'm in oil and gas or real estate or retail. And what I like to tell them is like, that's all the water industry, right? None of that's possible without water. And then on the micro scale, kind of moving on, of not just macro, what does this mean for water treatment, but also what does it mean for me? Every investor that's out there has what we call a deal box, right? And a deal box is what are the various metrics and measurements that I look for in a company that help me determine kind of the relative health of it, right? So revenue, I don't need to explain to you all, it's just sales, right? Margin, people will look at both gross margin, which is kind of the AWT standard, sales minus cost of goods sold, but also a lot of folks are interested in net margin, right? So how do you allocate labor to various projects in various regions? EBITDA, I'm not sure how familiar folks are with the term EBITDA. So I'll just pause here for a second just to explain it, because this is something that you might hear from investors. And this means it's an acronym for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So a lot of words there, but essentially it's a measure of profitability that is trying to normalize for the items that are within a business owner's control, right? So your taxes are very different in California than they are in Texas or Florida, to my everlasting chagrin. But what this does is allows you as a business owner to think about how does my day-to-day operations look like in terms of profitability, rather than focusing on how much taxes is Sacramento or DC going to take. And then other items are recurring revenue, right? What percentage of your revenue are from customers that come back every year? Customer churn, how many customers leave every year? Right, this is a sticky business, which is a great thing for you all, and kind of being able to plan out future investments or hires. Customer concentration. So I've always, I love talking with owners, and one of the things that I hear repeatedly is the owner entrepreneur that started the business because they had a great client that they were able to take with them and kind of start the business, which is amazing. But also really risky when that client's engineering staff retires or goes out to bid. And so customer concentration is something to think about is, what percentage of your overall revenues come from 1 or 2 or 3 clients? And then networking capital, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one. Feel free to reach out to me afterwards. We can talk about it in more detail. This is essentially a metric based off of your balance sheet. And it's the difference between your assets and your liabilities. And a positive net working capital, essentially your assets are bigger than your liabilities, and it means you have some leeway there to make operational investments in the future. It doesn't mean negative net working capital is bad. It just means it's a different situation. And so investors will look at that and have some perspective on what that means for the long-term business. And so as we're talking about this exit and this transition for you all, or at least if you're starting to think about it, a lot of the times owners' minds immediately go to the financial side of this business. They go to, how big is my company? How big is my profit? How many staff do I have? What does the growth look like? But they forget that investors are also really interested in kind of the overall operational considerations as well. And that's something that, to you all, as you think about transitioning, if it's a lot of it's in your head, I would highly recommend starting to put some of it down in SOP, standard operating procedures, or putting it down on paper, so that it can last beyond you, so that company X is not John's company, but John works for company and owns company X, right? And I think there's a nuance there. And so a few items that, I, as someone who recently bought a business, but also investors generally tend to think about, are things like sales and marketing, right? Do you have a website? Do you have case studies that you can use to market? Do you have a sales team, or do you have like a CRM, a customer relationship management software, that allows all of those relationships and leads and target clients that are in your head, putting them down on paper, so that when you're able to transition, both your staff is well set up for success, but the investor also has confidence that this can go beyond you. Number two, insurance. This is the least sexy topic that anybody can ever talk about in running a business. But as you're thinking about insurance, think about things like, do you have the right workers' comp classifications? Do you have the right levels of general liability? Do you have employee liability insurance? And these are things where, I don't think this will ever hold up your ability to retire. But as you're talking with investors, it's something that they'll be really concerned about, and making sure that the company is set up right now for success once you leave. And so here I recommend, don't spend more money than you have to, right? No one's recommending you spend more money on insurance than you have to, but I would talk to your broker and figure out kind of what is the market standard right now for a host of different insurance items. And I'm happy to share that information with you if you reach out. And that will be something that I think will put you in a good position and a better position operationally. IT. So we've heard a lot about hackers and cyber over the last many years. And actually, I'll put a plug in here for Mike Reinert, who I know did a podcast in the past, and I don't know if he did a webinar or not. But Mike's a great guy, and I just had a conversation with him a few days ago about, how do you develop an ideal IT process for your company? Is it as simple as moving from desktop to a local network, or a local network to the cloud and Google Drive? Do you need to put in things like multi-factor authentication to ensure that certain people aren't getting into certain files? There's a lot of different things on IT that we should all be thinking about, especially as we grow and become bigger. And I guess for that one, I'm not an expert there. I'd recommend you reach out to Mike, but spend some time on thinking through, again, what would the investor in his or her shoes think about my current IT setup, and how can I improve that and improve my business? And last but not least, contracts and proposals, which I think is just a fascinating topic in the water treatment industry, because as you all know, this is a relationships-based industry. And a lot of the times as we think about new clients, it's a buddy who switched building, he was a building engineer and switched companies, and is calling us up and said, hey, can you start be my water treatment company next month, over the phone? And that's great, right? We all like revenue coming in the door, but having the ability to document that in some way and be able to hand that to somebody else, whether it's your employees, your HR team, your investor, and say, this is the documentation for how you know that I have a good client here. And I'm not telling you, don't go out and hire a lawyer and write a 10-page legal document and have all your clients sign it, right? That's a waste of money and time. But start to get some written documentation, even if it's on proposals, some basic terms of how quickly our client's going to pay you. That will really start to provide you with that kind of organizational maturity that the company will last beyond you as you transition out. And so a lot of people, as they're looking to sell their business, their mind immediately goes to, how should I value my business? And I'm not going to provide kind of the number for all of you over this webinar. But the things that, in addition to kind of the macro and micro items that I brought up earlier, that are important into how you value your business, a few of them are listed here, right? So the size, right? As the company gets bigger, the EBITDA gets bigger, the service area gets bigger, potentially the value of your business grows as well. The stability of the business. Do you have strong recurring revenue? Has your company been growing steadily over the last number of years? How did you perform during COVID? I mean, I've talked to owners that have been through 9/11, the '08 financial crisis, and COVID, and all three of those situations, their revenues grew, right? That is a very unique aspect of the water industry, and it's why people are excited about it, and something that I think you all should really try and emphasize in conversations. Customers, how many customers do you have? This goes to that customer concentration item. How do they pay? You know, in the oil and gas market, I remember I was talking to an owner, and his accounts receivable was bigger than his revenues from the last year. And that is something that's very hard to predict how a company will do if you have situations like that. And then the business model, right? Are you a project company or are you a service company? Do you have a fabrication shop? Do you have a chemical blending shop? Or are you just going around and kind of doing a circuit rider consultative approach to your clients? Neither of those or none of those are better than the others necessarily, but it's something that you should think about, you know, how choppy is your business as you're thinking about the value. And market, I won't read all these off to you, but again, things like O&G are viewed very differently than food and bev. And then pausing here for a little bit, just on this second to last item, organizational maturity. Because I think this is something that is incredibly important generally as we're talking about the transition or your retirement. We live in a relationships business. Most owner entrepreneurs of AWT companies are their team's best salesperson, and usually their team's best service person as well. And so as you think about transitioning out and starting to kind of build up that organizational back end to allow your company to continue on, it's really important that you start elevating middle management into customer relationship roles, vendor relationship roles, allowing the business to basically have a bit of a, you know, what happens if, you know, you get hit by a bus plan. And then kind of with that in mind as well, you know, the field service versus the back end, right? So this is an industry, once again, that's run and grown by sales and service. But the back end, the accounting, the billing, the HR is really important and something that, again, will only increase the value of your business if you spend time on it. And then last but not least, but differentiation, right? Do you have an exclusive technology? Do you have an exclusive license to a technology? Do you have a regional moat, meaning, you know, nobody else would dare enter into your territory because you're just so competitive there? Those are all things that are really valuable. And then what I'll recommend, and this is, I just say this from thinking about it from the other side of the table, is these businesses are your babies, right? They are oftentimes your second families. And there's a huge emotional aspect to the selling of these businesses. And so as you think about what is the value of my business, there's the financial aspects, there's the operational aspects, and then there's the emotional aspects. And so I went through and I was looking at, you know, there's a lot of businesses that are coming up for sale, right? About $1 trillion worth of businesses coming up for sale in the next generation within the US. And what percentage of what percentage of companies actually sell that go up for sale? Meaning owners that have decided that they want to sell, what percentage actually end up getting bought? And there's a group called the Exit Planning Institute, which I had never heard of, but I think it's a pretty funny name. And they said, their research shows that somewhere between 20 to 30% of businesses that go up for sale actually end up being sold. 20 to 30%. And so what that means is, well, one, you know, some businesses don't get sold because they're bad businesses. But I think the other aspect that their research showed was a lot of the times owners have subscribed or ascribed emotional value to those businesses that prevent a deal from getting done. And so I'm all for owners getting the best deal that they can, but remembering that emotional aspect is not something that another investor can kind of have, because they didn't shed the blood, sweat, and tears that you all have over the last 30 years to grow the company. And so very quick, easy calculation. How do I value my business? It's the profitability of the business, so the EBITDA. Remember that earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Multiply a certain number of years of profitability, and that gives you your total enterprise value, right? And that's the easiest way to think about it. It's way more nuanced than that in your conversations, but that's just at a high level. And so the questions for you to raise or have conversations with investors or your team about are, what's the structure, right? So if an investor comes to you and gives you a huge number that gets you excited, but is going to pay you $0 up front and pay you a little bit over the next 10 years, that's probably not a good deal for you, right? You should think about that because there's risk involved with that. Why not just stay the owner for 10 years if that's the deal, right? The multiples, right? So if someone comes to you and says, I'll pay you 3 times profitability or 4 times profitability, try and figure out if that's the number that you think is fair. There's kind of industry standards, and again, we can talk about that afterwards offline if helpful. But everything is a negotiation, and so treat it that way. The other item here that I'd recommend everyone think about is the idea of rollover. So when you're looking to transition the business, whether it's to an employee or to a kid or to another investor, a lot of the times folks will offer you the ability to basically not sell a portion of the business until later, right? So maybe you sell 90% or 80% of the business and keep 10 to 20% because you think that you've set up the company for success and that is going to grow over the next many years. So you should be able to keep that 10% and sell it again in 5 years when you think it's going to be worth more than the 90% you're selling today. So that's something that a lot of investors would actually like to see. They want to see the owner have some buy-in, but also could potentially be incredibly lucrative for you all in terms of a second bite of the apple as somebody who comes in with maybe some additional money and can make investments in the company that aren't just bootstrapping like you've done over the past many years. And then employee participation. I've had conversations with companies that say, this would be great, but we want these key employees to maintain some ownership. Some investors will say no to that. I think that probably tells you a lot about that type of investor and what their culture is. And the investors who say absolutely, then it's a question of who are the employees and what percentage do they get to keep. All right, so that's a little bit of a high level. Who are potential investors? What are they looking for? Why is it interesting to them? Then the question becomes, how do you support your employees and customers through this process? Right, making the decision of who you transition the business to is really important to all those above. So if you're thinking about selling to employees, friends, and family, the questions for you are, how do they pay you for the business? But also, when you get to second and third generation and they're not necessarily owner entrepreneurs, how do you supplement their skill sets, right? You have a unique skill set that you've developed over many decades. And maybe your kid is a great salesperson, but doesn't know a lot about service or doesn't know a lot about chemical blending. And so thinking about having conversations with them about how can you bring together other individuals to help supplement that skill set. If it's a private equity investor, making sure that they know the water industry, understanding what are their timeframes and their durations, what are their goals for years 5+ or years 7+. If their goal, the requirements that they sell in 7 years, how will that impact your employees? And then I think really importantly here is a lot of non-water investors won't actually run the business. They'll bring in somebody else to do it, right? They'll be the investor, they'll sit on the board, but then they'll have somebody else come in and run the business. And so as you think about that, figure out who that person is, figure out if they're a good cultural fit, think about how they'll treat your employees and your customers, because that's in many ways more important to the long-term nature of your business than the actual investor. Strategics, I've got nothing bad to say about the strategics of the world, but thinking about how will their culture change yours, what will that mean for your non-revenue producing staff, and thinking about, what have you been pitching your customers for the past 3 decades? And if it's something that is different than what you think strategics pitch, then just think about how that's going to impact your customers and their relationships with your company. And then last but not least, other. This one I think is it's just such a catch-all that I don't really have a set number of questions you should ask them, but like just why are they interested and how do they expect to succeed once you're gone? That's a really important question that again will dictate how your employees are treated going forward. All right, so because I know it's something that a lot of owners would prefer to do, and I guess going back to my picture of Nina, right? It's something that is in many ways preferable for people is how can I sell to my employees? How can I sell to my friends and family while also making sure that, I have enough income in the bank that I can, spend the next 40 years of retirement, 50 years of retirement. And there's a few ways that I think are worth mentioning here, right? Seller financing. You all may have heard this term before, but it essentially is you all become the bank. The owner becomes the bank, and you require the kids or the relatives or the employees to pay you a certain amount up front, right? So you decide on a value of the business, right? Using that profitability times the multiple of years. And then you ask the employees or the kids to pay a certain amount up front. And then you all come together and determine that remaining 90% of the business that you haven't been paid for, how long will you have to wait to get paid back for it? And what is the term of that loan? Essentially, it's a loan, right? And what is the interest rate hypothetically? And so maybe it's 10% upfront with 90% over 5 years with a 7% interest rate, right? Like those are just numbers I'm throwing out, but those are numbers that you can come together with them, and then they can pay for that from the actual cash flows from the operating business rather than from their bank accounts. Number two is, I should say all of the items I'm putting up here are not mutually exclusive, and realistically, in order to get this done, it'll be a combination of a few different items. But staying on board as a consultant or as an employee, right? Getting a little bit upfront from those owners or those new owners, those buyers, and then staying on and getting basically paid a salary for a number of years. There's a lot of individuals out there that are looking to make minority investments, right? Investors that are out there that would love to buy 40% of the company from you. And then maybe your employees buy the remaining 60% and they have a little bit more in the bank to do so. And then last but not least, some people get very scared by the word debt. And I understand it. It's scary. But in some respects, if your company can take on some debt from a local bank and pay you that money, right? You shouldn't be personally guaranteeing that, right? The company should be personally guaranteeing that. And then your company pays back that debt over time with cash flows from the business. That gives you that cash in the bank and allows your company to basically take on some of the risk of paying you back, right? So again, none of these is the one size fits all approach. A lot of times people will do a combination of these four or others in order to figure out a way to structure the deal so that the next generation can take over. And then so I did this podcast last year with Trace in November, and I talked a lot about how should you think about transition, how should you go about your transition, and then Trace at the end rightfully stopped me and brought up, how should I think about this as an employee, right? Maybe I don't want to buy the business, maybe I do, but how do I think about this in terms of what it means for my future? And so I guess this is all to say, if you're an employee and you're listening to this conversation, you should be talking with ownership, right? You should be communicating with them. If they're getting up in age and you think that they're looking to retire at some point, tell them and ask them what their plans are and tell them what your goals could be, right? If you're interested in buying the business, communicate that with them so that they can then see that as an opportunity for them to not go out and run a process, which is really, really draining on owners. Start to think about partnerships, right? If you are younger and don't have the cash to go buy these, most people don't have the cash to buy these companies outright by themselves. Go think through partnerships. Go find other employees that you like and respect and work well with, and try and buy the company together and do it as a group of people. As always, owners can give you more management, or you can go take more management. And so I think as you think about becoming an owner yourself, if that's of interest, starting to work your way into more of a management role. And this goes hand in hand with number one, but start speaking with local banks and credit unions and small business administration. If the owner says, if you go to the owner and say, hey, I'd really love to own this business someday. The owner might say, okay, what's the plan? And it's always a good idea to have a plan as you're going into those conversations, even if it's not fully fleshed out, or even if you want to have that conversation in an ongoing capacity with the owner together, which obviously would be ideal if you have that sort of a relationship. Okay, so with that being said, now we're back to the owners. What should I do once I decide to sell? This is, I created a word art in PowerPoint. This is just a very high level, kind of left to right, of what are some of the steps that you should be taking. Now, I've talked about it a few times today, but building out that operational team, kind of sharing responsibility with the next layer of management so that the business can last beyond you, I think is really, really important, both for your company today, but also for how a potential acquirer would view it. Start responding to some of those emails. I know you all get emails all the time, most likely from people who would be interested in buying your business. Nothing requires you to enter into a contractual agreement with anybody by having a 30-minute conversation. But I think by having those conversations, it's just like making cold calls to potential clients, right? You learn a lot more by having more conversations. Start to plan your growth plans and your investments over the next several years. One of the things that we didn't talk about in the past, but investors are really interested in is continued growth. And so if you're an owner entrepreneur and you decide, hey, I'm selling the business in 3 years, I'm just going to drain the business into my bank account over the next 3 years. The business will feel that. You'll not see a growth, and frankly, that will hurt your long-term value of your business as well. Start to transition client and vendor relationships. And I have your cleanup financials. And so I know Trace did another podcast recently with a guy that was kind of talking about how do you manage your financials of your business and grow with that. And I think a lot of times people are seeing that their checking account is growing and view that as my company is growing. And that's not always the case. And so one of the things that I've done in the past that I always like to recommend to folks is there are these people called fractional CFOs or fractional bookkeepers. And you don't have to hire them as full-time employees. Maybe they come on once a month, once a week, you can decide. But basically we'll help you, whether you have QuickBooks or Sage or you're working on Excel, it will help you come in and create a financial document, your income statement, your balance sheet, your cash flow statement that will allow you to most appropriately and most beneficially give information to whether it's the next generation or outside investors. And also, frankly, again, operationally will help you understand how your business is doing year over year, month over month. And then the second to last thing, which is probably the most important thing that I will tell you today, is building your mergers and acquisitions team if or when you decide to transition or sell the business. And what do I mean by that? Most of you, maybe all of you, have never sold a business before. And investors buy businesses all the time. The other people that buy or help businesses sell all the time are things like M&A lawyers or M&A accountants. And so as you're thinking about selling your business, go find someone who's sold a lot of business as an M&A lawyer. Go find an accountant that has helped sell businesses before. Because the old adage, you're not an expert in something until you've done it for 10,000 hours. If you are only doing this once, you are not going to be good at it, right? It's just like you're not going to be, if I threw you in front of a cooling tower and you've never done before and said, hey, diagnose a problem, you will have no idea what you're doing. And so finding trusted advisors that can help you through this process is key to being successful in it. And then once you have done that and you get comfortable, you go back to some of those emails and conversations, you request offers from them, you sign a letter of intent, you go through the due diligence process, which is typically 60 to 90 days, and then you go fishing, do whatever you want to do. computer just froze. So as that comes up, I'll just talk to the slide because I know it. The last things to remember before I stop talking are you aren't alone. A lot of people are going through this. You know, that those stats on the AWT of the number of water treatment companies that are out there right now, all looking to figure out what to do with, for their company, whether it's sell to somebody else, sell to somebody internally, or close the doors. Everyone's going through these same questions and having these same conversations. So reach out to folks that have sold in the past and been successful. Talk to people that you trust, and just remember that this is you might be selling the business, but it's a group effort. Again, you have options, right? So closing the doors and just waiting until you retire and then never selling is an option. And so remember that, no one's forcing you to do anything. There are a lot of factors that I think are leading to owners looking to kind of explore next steps outside of just getting older, right? There are, and this isn't a political statement, taxes are going to rise over the next probably 6 months or a year. And so as you're making you're planning decisions about what that looks like for you, if you think taxes are going to raise by 50%, and that's a high number, right? But let's say 50%, that means if you grow your company 2 times in terms of revenue or profitability and sell in 5 years, you're going to end up with the same amount of money. So think about that. And also just think about what long-term perspectives or, interest rates are really low. So valuations are higher in the market today. So it could be a good time for you. And then last but not least is finding that expert team behind you. This business better than anybody else. You probably don't know how to sell a business as well as a lot of people that you could know and trust. And so as you start to think through that process, don't just get an LOI from an investor and say, this looks good. Find someone that can help you analyze that. And the reason why is not just to get the best deal, but actually a lot of deals don't happen because owners sign something and then 2 months down the road think that they've got a bad deal, right? So make sure that you have somebody in your corner that can help you negotiate, help you understand what is fair, and then go through that process. And let me pause there. I'm done speaking to everybody. Appreciate the time. Obviously happy to help talk offline if anybody has any questions about this or doesn't want to speak up, but also happy to answer any Q&A that exists now.
Well, let's go ahead and move into that. A couple of people shared some questions with me privately they wanted me to ask. And while I'm asking that, if you have a question, in the bottom of your screen, you'll see a reactions button. You can click raise hand, and that way we're not talking over each other. So while you all are doing that, let me ask a couple of these questions, Mike, and thank you for that presentation. That was very well laid out, and I think it gave us a lot to think about. One of the questions was, should we be talking to our potential employees or to our employees that could potentially buy the company? And should we be meeting with an attorney to talk about what a buy and sell agreement looks like? So why don't we ask the question as it's stated, but then also what is a buy and sell agreement?
Sure. Yeah. So really what I would recommend is having a very, very open conversation with trusted employees, right? So I think first and foremost, you need to talk with a lawyer about some of the opportunities for you and how you might want to structure that. That's very important to having a successful conversation with your employees. But I think equally as important with that is finding who are those right employees, not scaring them, right? Some of them might not be interested in buying and might freak out about you selling, but having an honest conversation with them, bringing in a lawyer to help structure that, and thinking through kind of what that structure might look like. So, a buy and sell agreement, it really is just a buyout agreement, right? It's how do you pay somebody for something that you can't afford right now over a period of time? And so I called it seller financing, but a buy-sell agreement is another way to frame it, of getting a contract in place, having a lawyer write it up, have your employees, also get a lawyer, negotiate that agreement. the terms, the duration, the interest rate, and then figure out how much they can pay up front, but actually have a legal written contract that will allow them to buy back, or excuse me, buy that company or pay you for that company over a period of time.
Somebody asked me if there were any podcasts that we did on procedures, and there is one. It's actually there's several out there, but the one that specifically deals with procedures is episode 131. I interviewed a lady named Alicia Pierre Butler, and she goes through a process on how you can do exactly what Michael was talking about and take some of the things out of your head and get it into a procedure. Michael, another question was, you said it was EBITDA times a certain amount of years. How do you know the certain amount of years?
Short answer is nobody knows a certain amount of years. This is something where, I think in the water treatment industry, we've seen a range of multiples, right? And so it'll depend. The Halloween costume just came by me. So the larger companies typically have higher multiples. The smaller companies typically have smaller multiples. And there, the question really is, this is why I say, go out and talk to an M&A lawyer or an M&A advisor and have them help you think through kind of what is the quote unquote market right now for a company of my size within my industry. And I think size is important. Operational quality is important. Customer base is important. All those deal box metrics are important. But I think the other thing to remember is the industry is very important as well. So if you're looking at Facebook and you're like, I should get paid a multiple like Facebook gets paid, you're probably wrong. And that's why a lot of deals don't happen. And so understanding, like, how do I compare to what are called like industry comparables? How do I compare to other businesses that have sold in my industry, rather than saying, my buddy just sold a software business for X amount of dollars, I should get the same thing.
Michael, follow up to that is it's, I don't know if it's customary or not, but what we've heard more is so many times revenue. Mm-hmm. So how does that compare to EBITDA? Should we be looking at different ways on valuation? Help us out with that.
Yeah, I think so there's a couple just thoughts in response to that. Some investors will base their letters of intent or their sale agreements based on revenue. Some will base it based on EBITDA. Realistically, they could be the same thing, right? You might end up with the same enterprise value, because if you're let's just use rough numbers, right? You're $1 million revenue company and you have $200,000 of EBITDA. If someone values your company at one times revenue or 5 times EBITDA, those are the same thing. And so in terms of how you think about it, growing revenue and growing profitability are both good things for you. And in terms of how investors are looking at it, I guess I would ask the question to the investor of, why are you valuing it based off of revenue or EBITDA, right? If it's because, they see your revenue and they're going to cut all the staff, and so they don't care about what your current profitability is, that could be good for you. That could also be bad for you. That's your decision. But really, it's just trying to think through worry less about the multiple and more about the total enterprise value.
You mentioned it's never too early to start talking to a bank, but then you also said try not to have it personally guaranteed. Is there ever a point in time where a bank doesn't want you to personally guarantee the loan?
So I've been through this process myself, and there are a lot of banks that are out there that if you have created enough of that, I'll say organizational maturity, and you're able to essentially guarantee at the corporate level, right? So again, I go back to this adage of, company A is owned and is where John works, but John is not company A. And this is, again, something where talk to banks, talk to lawyers, because they can help you set up that structure. Whether you're a C Corp, S Corp, LLC, they can help you think through, how do I move away from the personal guarantee? And, frankly, sometimes banks, maybe your trusted bank will not allow that. And that I'm not able to be helpful for, but, having just gone through that process, it is possible. And, you just need to think through that a little bit more.
And just looking around the room, there are several people that are attending that are well off of retirement age. They have lots of years to think about this. How should they be thinking about this? Is there something they need to start doing today, or just worry about this when they start thinking about retirement?
So on my podcast, I said it's never too early to start thinking about it, right? You can start 10 years beforehand, you can start 5 years beforehand, all with the intention of understanding, um, you know, how do I budget investments? Do I want to buy myself a vacation home, or do I want to hire a couple more salespeople that will pay off 3, 4 years down the road and grow the company? Right. So your timeline to retirement is really important in understanding how I make investments into the company today. I also think as you're thinking about if you want to sell 10, 20 years down the road, um, really emphasizing that topic of organizational maturity and making sure that it's not a top heavy organization, right? You don't necessarily need a flat organization, but you need something where, if you, again, sorry to use this example, like if you got hit by a bus, what would happen to the company? Do you have the customer relationships with the team underneath you? Is your back office the one that are kind of doing the vendor relationship work and negotiating terms, or is that you, right? And starting to build out the team underneath you, because again, that will only, one, help you grow and make your company more valuable, but two, will make the risk that an investor sees much, much less once you are retiring and transitioning out of the business.
Well, I see that Cindy Mitchell has a question. Cindy, if you will unmute and please ask your question.
Good morning. I love this presentation. I will go ahead and let everyone know that I have no family, no children, brothers, sisters. So I am leaving the company to key employees, and I've already started this process. But what concerns me in that situation, and I don't know if I should check with the facilitator off screen or whatever. The younger generations, there's so much turnover. We've been in business since 1972, and we got a lot of key employees retiring. How do you train people to manage the company as you put yourself into retirement?
It's a great question, Cindy, and thank you for sharing. Yeah, happy to talk with you more offline. I think workforce retention is something that we all think about a lot. You don't want to give part of the company to someone who's going to go look for a warmer seat in a year. And I think, so it's going to depend on the employee, right? But I think ownership in general tends to make people stick around longer, right? That's why a lot of startup companies offer ownership to employees to make them feel like they are long-term vested in the growth and success of the company. In terms of your last question of how do you train those employees in order to be successful? I think there's a couple different ways that I think you could go about it, right? Trace talks a lot about kind of the networking within industry and industries at large of kind of how to manage people, right? There's like the Vistage groups, and there's young presidents organizations, things like that. But I think in terms of your day-to-day, taking folks under your fold, having them do rounds with you, helping them solve problems, understand problems is important. I think I know one guy, Russ Baskin in my Rising Tides group, brings in kind of professional sales training once a year from folks that have kind of a real framework and structure to it. Actually, it's in many respects a lot of the leadership training that Nalco and other folks used to provide to their employees, which is why I think you see some success of these smaller AWT firms. So I think I'd love to talk about it more, Cindy, offline. I think it's a question based both on employee and kind of employee type and skill set, but also just in terms of what do you want to train them for? Is it management? Is it sales? Is it service? And there's different answers to all of those.
I'm actually looking to move from president to chairman. I'm second generation. My father has been deceased 5 years, who founded the company. And so I don't want to, and he had a really hard time letting go.
Sure.
So I'm actually looking to get executive level key employees, like the sales manager, to understand business, not just the sales and technical side of our industry. Are there support groups, or does is that, has AWT created, I've sent 2 people 2 years to the business owners meeting to help train them, but I'm looking for more.
Yeah, so I think, Cindy, a couple, just a couple more thoughts. There are plenty of kind of executive leadership training programs, and we can talk about that. But I think the other way, and I'll just give a shameless plug to Trace and Rising Tides. So if you have key members of the team that you would like to learn from others and kind of see how others are approaching problems, whether it's as simple as understanding how do cash flows work, or how is supply chain managed right now, or what are some of the leadership challenges on HR that folks are facing in their day-to-day, having them maybe reach out to Trace, or reach out to me, and I'll pass them along to Trace about joining a Rising Tide group and joining that once a week, essentially kind of live training just based on other people's experiences and kind of what they're doing, kind of with the idea that the sum of all parts is greater than its whole.
Okay, thank you so much, and I have truly enjoyed this program.
Thanks, Cindy.
Are there any more questions? Michael, great information, lots of things to think about. One more time, if somebody wants to reach out to you, how should they connect with you?
Feel free to email me. It's Michael, MACHAEL, @eaiwater.com.
All right. And then also a reminder, AWT has recorded this, so this will be available. And one last reminder, we have our final hang of the year. And if you're wondering what a hang is, that's where we get together on a Zoom call. We have some fun. We get to meet people within this industry. We have a few fun activities. The next one, the last one of the year, is going to be November 11th at 6 p.m. Eastern time. You can register for that by going to scalinguph2o.com/hang. Michael, thanks again. Great information.
Thank you, Trace.
And stay tuned for our calendar for some new business topics when we finalize it for next year. Take care, everybody.
Bye, everybody.